Good day, learners. You're on to Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. My name is Daniel Arurade. I'll be teaching you literature, and today we want to look at a very interesting poem and a specific aspect of the poem.
Eko Learners Support, a support program of the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education for WAEC and NECO candidates.
Mood and imagery in a government driver on his retirement. I'm sure that you have either read this poem before or you have a copy of your poem right there with you. If you don't, please pick it up as we continue. This lesson explores the mood and imagery in the poem, and it will help you to understand how the poet has used imagery to convey very important lessons in the poem. Of course, we are going to also learn the various kinds of imageries that have been used in the poem, and you're going to understand the mood in this poem. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain the poem, discuss the different moods in the poem, and of course, extract instances of imagery in the poem. Let's move on. It's important for you to know the poem's narrative. As you can see, the poem, A Government Driver on His Retirement by Onu Chibuike, is a narrative poem that explores the joy of retirement and the dangers of uncontrolled excitement and drunkenness. Of course, it tells the story of a government driver who dies in a car accident on the same day that he retires from government service. Isn't that pathetic? Let's move on. First of all, we want to look at the moods in the poem. The moods in the poem. First of all, what is mood? Mood is the state of mind of the writer while he writes a piece of work. The state of mind of the writer while he writes. Now, a person could be happy, sad, disturbed, could feel indifferent while he writes. But this reflects on how the poet has used language. Okay? However, The Government Driver on His Retirement is a very interesting poem that shows us how mood can switch from that of excitement and joy to great melancholy. What actually happened here? Many years on wheels, in faithful service to his fatherland. Today, he retires home, and then a celebration he holds. That line, holding a celebration, retiring home, and every other thing that he does in celebration of this retirement, shows that the poet is happy. Even the poet, the persona in the poem, is happy, excited that he has retired. As a matter of fact, he has a car to his name, a brand new car to celebrate. He calls his friends and said, "Come, friends, celebrate with me." This shows that the poet persona is so happy. The driver himself is so happy that he is retiring at that time. So that gives us the first mood that we have, which is a happy mood. A happy mood. Now, as you can see on the board, we have the beginning of the poem displaying an happy and joyous mood, or that of excitement. And that spanned from the first stanza to the fifth stanza. But something happens. The last two stanzas are, however, filled with the mood of pity and shock. The readers are suddenly shocked and begin to feel pity. Why? It says that he continues to drink and booze and booze. And he continued in his enjoyment, drinking, until he got into his car and boozed and boom and zoomed his car. These are onomatopoeias used to show how he moved from enjoyment into the tragic incident of his accident and death. And so this gives us suddenly a feeling and a mood of pity and shock. But let's look at some of the imageries that have been used in this poem. The first, we have the visual imagery. The poet says, many years on wheels. Many years on wheels. The use of the word wheel wheels here gives us an idea of what he's talking about or what the poet is trying to say. Wheel is just a part of the car or the entire vehicle, but he chose to say many years on wheels. And don't forget that when you use a part of something to represent the whole of it, you have used a figure of speech known as synecdoche. Synecdoche. Now, this synecdoche helps the poet to create an image on the mind of the reader. And what image is this? The image of a car. Of course, a driver in the car. And that's a picture that appeals to your sense of what? Sight. So this is a visual imagery. Visual imagery. All right, let's move to the next. Okay. Now we have another kind of imagery used in this poem called auditory imagery. We have discussed imageries in the last class, so I believe that you have a foreknowledge of what auditory imagery is. It's kind of imagery that appeals to your sense of hearing. Now, the onomatopoeia zoom, used in line 14, creates a familiar sound of a vehicle moving. Okay? And of course, you know, this appeals to your sense of what? Hearing. I hope you know what onomatopoeia is. When words are used to represent sounds in literature, you call it an onomatopoeia. And this onomatopoeia has helped the poet to create an image on the mind of the reader. And that image is called auditory imagery. I'm sure you know the sound that a car makes when it zooms off. All right. Let's move on to the next. We have gustatory imagery used in this poem. Gustatory imagery. And of course, you remember that gustatory imagery is an image created in the mind of the reader that appeals to the sense of taste. Now, look at this. Gustatory imagery. Boozy truth. Boozy truth, as used in line 5, appeals to the reader's sense of taste. Because immediately, this helps you to begin to feel what the driver felt while he was taking his alcoholic drink. And this is a gustatory imagery because it appeals to your sense of taste. Is boozy truth. All right. Now, we have looked at a government driver on his retirement. We have looked at mood in a government driver on his retirement. And we have looked at the use of imageries Now it is time to answer a question. Discuss the use of imagery in the poem, A Government Driver on His Retirement. How has imagery been used? Now please understand that there are techniques and there's an approach that must be followed in answering questions, especially theory questions in literature. Now the question says you should discuss the use of imagery, which means you are supposed to identify and extract all areas where imagery has been used and discuss it. Explain why they have been used, and of course, give us examples from the poem. But first, you are supposed to tell us a little bit about the poem. So the first thing to do is to tell us about the poem. And identify central themes. All right? So the first thing to do is to tell us about the poem. And what I mean here is that you do an introduction. An introduction which contains central themes which pertains to the question that has been asked. So we have looked at the types of imageries we have. And of course, you know that one of the imageries that was used showed us who the driver was, and that who the poet persona was, which is a driver. And that tells us how proud he is to have been a driver and to be retiring from service. That shows us the joy of retirement. So that's one of the themes that must be identified. The joy of retirement. Okay? And of course, there are other themes there that imagery was used to point out. Don't forget that we saw other kinds of imagery. For instance, the issue of zoom. That imagery creates an idea that he has gotten a new car and now is driving home. But what happens with that imagery, that auditory imagery? He zooms off into his death. That tells us that we have another theme of the tragedy of uncontrolled excitement. Okay, now it is very important for you to identify some of the themes that were used in the introductory part of your answers. This is very, very important. Now, after telling us about the poem and giving us some of the themes that were explored through the use of imagery in the poem, it is time to identify each of those imageries that has been used with reference to the poem. It is very important for you to make reference to the poem by either quoting the poem or giving what I call echoes from the poem. So you should be able to tell us that at a point the driver was many years on wheels. You should be able to tell us that at a point he boozed his senses away. At another point you should be able to tell us in another paragraph that he zoomed and zoomed off and zoomed into his death. Now please organize your points into different paragraphs, and then you must have a conclusion. Now, what should your conclusion entail? Your conclusion should summarize the points that you have outlined in other paragraphs and must contain your opinion, which must be in line with that of the poets. It must be in line with that of the poets. And I want you to try this out on your own. Write and try to answer this question. Write it in a book. Don't just think about it. Make sure you write it, and you will be happy that you have answered the question. Thank you very much. If you have questions or suggestions, please reach us on our social media handle displayed on the screen. Thank you.
Acing your WAEC and NECO examinations has been made easy by the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education with the Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO Candidates television program. Join seasoned teachers as they take you through these core subjects, targeting the exact syllabus of WAEC and NECO. Watch Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates through these social media platforms to access more educational content and give their feedback. Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. Pass your examinations with flying colors.